So the New York Community Trust is profiled in our Field Stories series, which is featured in Fund the People's free comprehensive toolkit that was released this fall. The Field Stories profile the experiences of 6 different types of funders from across the country who have invested in nonprofit talent. And the Field Stories talk about the impact that that investment has had on their nonprofit partners, communities, and issue areas. During our time together today, we will talk about the New York Community Trust, their story, and we'll have Patricia Swann talk about how the New York Community Trust has invested both in nonprofit talent and also leadership. We'll pause briefly for a Q&A, and then we will turn it over to Sharese Bullock-Bailey, who is a 2016 New York Community Trust Leadership Fellow, and she will share her story. Then we'll pause for a more in-depth Q&A and discussion, and then we'll move on to next steps. So the objectives for today's webinar are outlined in front of you. We hope that today all of you will gain a deeper understanding of the New York Community Trust values, philosophies, and talent investing practices. You'll also learn about the impact of the Leadership Fellows Program and the impact that it's had on one of its graduates, who's Sharese. And thirdly, we will highlight opportunities for funders and nonprofits to begin or deepen their talent investing practices. So I just wanted to tell you briefly about Fund the People and who we are. So we're the national campaign to maximize investment in the nonprofit workforce. And we focus our work primarily on foundations to create supply for supporting nonprofit talent and nonprofits who will create a demand for this type of funding and assistance that is currently in short supply. And part of the work for Fund the People is helping to lift up this issue. So we believe that nonprofit people are our most valuable asset in the field. And the nonprofit workforce represents 10% of the economy, or 11 million people in many professional roles, including leaders in nonprofits. And supporting the nonprofit workforce is critically important, given that the community needs have significantly increased and resources are diminishing, particularly for social service and social justice groups. So how does Fund the People carry out its work? We do it in 3 ways. We have a 3-part strategy. First, we make the case. We work to influence the attitudes of funders and nonprofits by making a compelling case for investing in nonprofit talent. Secondly, we equip for action. We design and distribute practical tools, promising practices, trainings, and other resources to empower funders and nonprofits to bake in talent investing into their strategies, attitudes, and practices. And the third part of the strategy is to build a movement. And we seek to build a critical mass of champions in the field who treat nonprofit professionals as the most important asset in the sector. So we think it's important to define what talent investing is so we're all on the same page. So talent investing is the intentional deployment of resources to support and develop professionals and leaders in the nonprofit workforce. You can find this definition and others that provide clear language to describe and discuss nonprofit talent and talent investing in our glossary of terms, which is included in our new toolkit. So why invest in nonprofits? We believe that increased investment in nonprofit professionals and organizations leads to improved performance, impact, and sustainability as outlined in this graphic. But I'd like to focus in on one aspect of impact that is vital for the sector: equity and inclusion. Although the U.S. has become much more diverse, this is not reflected in the nonprofit workforce in terms of its leadership. Only 16% of people of color hold leadership positions in the sector. And according to the recently released Building Movement Project report, Race to Lead, 50% of color surveyed want to become nonprofit CEOs. But in order for nonprofits to be as responsive and relevant as possible and achieve their desired impact, they need leadership and staff to not only reflect the diversity of population, but also to embrace equity and inclusion within their own organizations. We will hear more soon about how the New York Community Trust is working towards proactively changing the current leadership trends. So what is wrong in terms of this lack of investment in nonprofit talent? And the current reality is that there's a significant underinvestment in the nonprofit workforce. According to the Foundation Center data, as described here in this slide, 1% of foundation grant dollars support talent development. And a quick example of how this plays out in the field, a snapshot of grant applications submitted to the Maryland-based Weinberg Foundation, who we profile in our Field Story series, showed that a majority of those organizations that applied allocated 1% or less of their budget to professional development. So it's really time to change this current reality. And funders and nonprofits all have a role in making that possible. And that's why we're featuring the New York Community Trust and their story this afternoon. So I wanted to make sure that everyone on the webinar knows that, that Fund the People has this new toolkit available, and hopefully you had a chance to read the New York Community Trust Field Story so that you can learn more about how they carry out this work. We also encourage you to continue your own learning about talent investing by accessing some more resources in our new toolkit, including discussion guides for funders and also for nonprofits to talk more in depth about talent investing and also what talent development needs currently exist within the organizations. We also encourage you to, funders specifically, to look at the Guide to Investing in Grantee Talent to show you how you can actually carry out this in your own work. And we also invite you to look at our equity and inclusion statement, our literature review, and also our annotated bibliography. So, so now I'm happy to introduce you to our guest speakers today. And I have just unmuted Pat Swann and Sharese Bullock-Bailey. So, so Pat Swann is the Senior Program Officer for Thriving Communities and Community Development and Technical Assistance at the New York Community Trust. Pat's grant making includes community development, civic affairs, technical assistance. She is a board member of Philanthropy New York and serves as an advisory board member of the Brooklyn Workforce Innovations and the New York City office of the Local Initiative Support Corporation. She's also a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania's Pratt Institute Graduate School of Architecture and Planning, and she was a recipient of the Rebson Fellowship at Columbia University. And we're also excited to have Sharese Bullock-Bailey join us as well. And she's Chief Strategy. Hi, Sharese. Hi. She's Chief Strategy and Partnerships Officer at the Ghetto Film School. Sharese is an Emmy-nominated producer, strategic consultant, and leader in social impact investing and social impact storytelling. Sharese is the Chief Strategy and Partnerships Officer at Ghetto Film School and an executive board member of ITVS Independent Television Services. Sharese recently served as director of Tribeca Teaches, and she was selected by the Ford Foundation as a 2015 Rockwood Just Films Fellow and as a 2016 New York Community Trust Leadership Fellow. Sharese received a Bachelor's in Communications from the University of Pennsylvania, and she's also participated in the Financial Analyst Program at Goldman Sachs. So please join me in welcoming both Pat and Sharese. And now I'd actually like to turn it over to Pat to get us started. Welcome,
Great.
Pat.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Yolanda. So I'll start with a sort of big picture overview of New York Community Trust, and then I'll end up hopefully in a few minutes with a sort of a more deeper dive into a description of our capacity building work and specifically the Leadership Fellows Program. So we are the largest community foundation in New York City. We have 2 suburban divisions as well in Westchester County and Long Island. So we're a metropolitan funder. We do 190, in the last fiscal year, we did $197 million total in grants, which is a really big number, a nice number. Of that amount, 65 million are grants that are determined and based on recommendations from program officers like me, and the rest are donor advised grants. So we have 3 primary funding areas. They are Promising Futures, Healthy Lives, and Thriving Communities. And I'm a senior program officer in the Thriving Communities team. An overview of our technical assistance. It's really capacity building. We still call it technical assistance, but it's the same thing. We've consistently been a significant supporter of capacity building in New York City. We currently have our capacity building grant budget is about $1.5 million, give or take, every year. And we have basically 3 strategies for using those grant dollars. One is that we provide general operating support grants to 4 predetermined organizations that we feel are the strongest resources for nonprofit professional services in the city. We also do grants for specific issue areas that we think will impact the nonprofit sector. So for instance, we've supported efforts to reform the nonprofit contracting process that's used by city and state government. We also make small grants of $20,000 or less available to our individual grantees for very specific capacity building kinds of projects. So if a grantee, for instance, needs a consultant to help design a database, that's something they can come to us for, in addition to whatever the programmatic grant they receive from us. We also have 2, what I like to call trust branded programs in the area of nonprofit capacity building. One of them is the Nonprofit Management Excellence Awards, and we do that in partnership with Nonprofit Coordinating Committee, which is one of the major nonprofit membership organizations here in New York. And it's basically a competition. We use a competition to sort of lift up and educate people about best nonprofit management practices. And then the second branded program is the New York Community Trust Leadership Fellows Program. So the Leadership Fellows Program really has 2 goals. One is to provide mid-career nonprofit professionals with a deeper understanding of the competencies, skills, and talents needed to be effective leaders and managers. The other goal is to increase diversity among emerging leaders in the field. So it consists of 12 all-day instruction sessions that span a 3 or 4 month period. There are also lots of other events. We do Dean's Dinners with Dean Birdsell, the Dean of the School of Public Affairs and Public and International Affairs at Baruch. We have alumni events. There are 2 active peer groups right now, and the 3rd is just starting up. And we have a mentor matching component as well. The total budget for the program is about $465,000, and we are taking that full load on. So we're supporting the entire amount, aside from the considerable in-kind contribution from Baruch. About half of that amount is for faculty and for personnel and mentor stipends. So I mentioned Baruch, and I will say just a word about Baruch's very important role in this program. We are blessed to have a very sophisticated and impressive network of community colleges here in New York that go by the acronym of CUNY, and Baruch is one of the jewels of the CUNY system. And we scouted around and we settled on Baruch because they had a pretty impressive track record of working with nonprofit organizations on professional development certificate programs. Many of our grantees had worked with them before. They were very pleased with the results. It also was very important to us that Baruch is known to be exceptionally diverse, both in terms of the student body and in terms of its faculty. And I also had a very strong working relationship with Michael Seltzer, who's the director of the program, and who has basically been my sort of co-partner in crime and co-conspirator in designing and developing the Leadership Fellows program. So just a little background on our fellows. Over the past 3 years, we've had 6 cycles. We have roughly 162 graduates. 60% of them are people of color. They must have, in order to be eligible, you must have at least 3 years of experience managing people, resources, and budgets. They must work at organizations that have received grant support from the trust in the last 3 years, and they have to be nominated by their CEO. We are very pleased that because of the diversity of our grantee mix, it translates into a diverse mix of fellows. And so it just, by every way you can imagine measuring, the organization size and organization type, whether it's an advocacy group or a service organization. We also have a significant amount of diversity in terms of the function of the role of fellows. So there are many people who are part of the program who are in program, work in program areas, but there are also many others who are development people. We've had many people who work on the finance side of things. And we've also had a few IT folks as well. So it creates for a really interesting blend of perspectives. So, excuse me, Yolanda asked us to talk about why invest in talent development in the nonprofit sector and why now. And aside from it being a tradition here at New York Community Trust, I think that, you know, one thing that's often overlooked about the nonprofit sector is that unlike many industrial sectors, it is disproportionately dependent on people. We don't often think of the nonprofit sector as an industry, but it is. And because it's so dependent on people, you know, for us, that means that investing in the people is sort of a given, especially given that we are a community foundation. And we see ourselves as a community foundation responsible for supporting the overall industry, the overall nonprofit industry, and not just as a source of grants for individual organizations. So the other thing I wanted to mention, and we may have time to talk a little bit more about the why now part of the question, but I will say for now that I feel that for any foundation, whether community foundation, a private foundation, family foundation, any kind of funder, if you want to move the needle on an issue, it's important to look at the resources that you make available as not just supporting individual organizations, but building a movement. And in order to build movements, you have to nurture and develop leaders. They have to be strong enough and capable enough and creative enough and flexible enough to work together, because no single organization is going to be able to push policy in a place as complicated as New York and as complicated as our country right now. So finally, Yolanda also asked me to say a little bit about some of the challenges. And I thought of a whole lot of them, but I tried to keep the list manageable because it's a work in progress. One challenge we've been working on is figuring out a way to make the program as relevant as possible to each fellow's existing, you know, organizational setting. And so I mentioned early on the Change Initiative project that people need to describe as a part of their application. We initially factored into the cycle, each cycle, a break of 3 or 4 weeks, an interim period when people were theoretically going to work on their Change Initiative. But projects don't always follow a straight line trajectory, and that didn't quite work out. And so, although we still very much encourage the Change Initiative as a part of the learning, we're still trying to sort of figure out what's the best model for making that real. And so that's been a challenge. We also find that the diverse mix of people in terms of education and professional experience is both a blessing and a curse, in the sense that it's very challenging for instructors to create curriculum content that is relevant, challenging, you know, for people at various different skill levels. I mean, we've had people who have applied and been accepted into the program who have little, if any, college, and we've had people apply who've had 2 degrees. So it's a real interesting challenge for our instructors. Gender balance, you know, in addition to the diversity in terms of ethnicity and race, we often find it difficult to pull a representative number of males. So that's been a challenge. And then I would say too, the challenge of balancing technical skills and management skills with integrating into the program opportunities for people to establish social capital, which, as we've learned from the work, as Yolanda mentioned, the Race to Lead study and others have shown that in many cases, one of the handicaps, or handicap's not the best word, but one of the things that makes it difficult for people of color to advance to leadership positions often has nothing to do with their skill level, but has more to do with the social capital that they have with people in the field. And I think that's all that I'll say right now for now. And I'll hand it over to Sharese.
Great.
Thank you so much, Pat. That was actually really comprehensive, even as a graduate of the program myself, really rich with great framing, I think, for everyone about the Leadership Fellows experience. So to kick it off, evaluation really matters. How has the foundation started to evaluate the impact of the Leadership Fellows program? And I think even further, if you can just share with us some of the learnings and insights.
Well, we're actually in the process of evaluating. We brought in outside independent evaluators, and they're about 2/3 of the way through an 18-month process that's been very extensive. We are still sorting through a lot of the data that they've gathered. For the most part, the feedback has been positive. There have been some issues related to tweaking a little, an aspect of the curriculum here and there. We're very fortunate that Sharese is one of the, we have a evaluation committee that includes a faculty representative, a fellow representative, and as well as staff from Baruch, and 3 staff here from the Trust, including myself. One of our biggest challenges with the evaluation is that it's very hard to make a direct link between the program itself and the ways in which fellows may be advancing in their career or their profession. And so we're sort of grappling with that right now. And hopefully in another few months, as we conclude the evaluation, maybe we could do another webinar and focus exclusively on that.
Excellent. And it has been a really extraordinary and collaborative process working with our team here and with the evaluators. So some might describe the times that we're living in now, and I've been around for a few decades, many elder than myself, and those in the generations emerging, and really talked about the times we're in as times of times of times. We have a specific current political situation that has an impact on all of us in the work we do, particularly in the nonprofit field. Has that sort of this moment in time that we're in impacted the way you invest in nonprofit talent and the way you even view the work of the Fellows Program?
Yes. One of the points that started our thinking about the fellowship program was the recognition that the nonprofit sector leadership here in the city did not reflect the people of the city. It did not reflect that diversity. And this was true across the board, whatever issue area we were looking at. And so we're committed to trying to move that needle. So that's one way. I would say too that so many of the organizations that we support are involved in policy advocacy in some form or another. And changing policy is hard even in normal times. And in this day and age, I find that it's especially challenging because there are, it seems that everything is politicized. It also seems that it's sometimes even harder to make a case when people tend to gravitate toward their own interpretation of the facts. And so when you look at those kind of factors, it means to me that you really have to build not just strong organizations, but strong leaders that can make connections, because you got to connect, or else you're not gonna make a big difference. You can't work these kind of issues in isolation.
Excellent. And I think that's a perfect segue into my final question at this time, which is really about the message that you would share with other funders, with other organizations who are looking to invest in leadership talent in the nonprofit space. And what is your directive and clear message around the value of investing?
Well, you know, there's so many layers to that. I will say one message I would say is that you can't have strong organizations without strong leaders. And leaders, I interpret that to mean not necessarily just the CEO or the C-suite, but people in the organization who are taking initiative and being creative and responding to that organization's mission and what they're trying to accomplish. So you can't build strong organizations without also investing in the people who are running them, would be the main message.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Pat and Sharese. So, so now I'd like to turn it over to Sharese to help us learn more about your journey and how the New York Community Trust Leadership Fellows Program has helped you with it. So I will turn it over. Actually, I'm actually going to just pause for a minute. I jumped ahead of myself. We wanted to pause just very quickly for any questions from the audience, and we actually have several, but let's take one of these first, and then when we have our Q&A after Sharese's part of the webinar, we'll get into the rest of the questions. So, question for Pat about the evaluation. So let me just pull that up. The question was, for the evaluation work that you've done, what are the key questions you're looking to answer through the evaluation? And that question came from Kristen Ruff at Philanthropy New York.
Hi, Kristen. We're trying to determine if this program makes a difference in the sort of career trajectory of the individuals who participate. We're also, you know, delving a little bit deeper than that. We're also trying to see if it has an impact on the sort of stitching together relationships of organizations that may not otherwise have happened without this program, which is something that we encourage, and we see it happening sort of organically in any event with various kinds of programmatic collaborations. We're trying to determine if this program is making a difference both in the lives of the individuals and in the impact of the organizations that are participating. We also have this interesting phenomenon where we have many what I call repeat customers. And Sharese's organization, when she was in the fellowship program, is one of them, who've had 2, sometimes 3 people that have gone through the program. And so we're trying to see if that cluster of individuals that have gone through the program are having an impact on the organization itself and its whole sort of attitude and culture around professional development and investing in leadership.
Great, thanks, Pat. I'm going to hold the rest of these questions for after Sharese's part of the presentation, and they're all very good questions. So I want to keep you on your. I want to keep you in suspense for these questions.
Okay.
So Sharese, tell us about your story.
Sure. I am going to frame my background and story as a storyteller would. I've been trained as a storyteller, and so if you all bear with me, there will be a continuous thread of both background, the reason that I chose to be a part of the Leadership Fellows Program, my why, if you will, and then also some really specific areas of impact that the Leadership Fellows Program has had on my career and on my leadership lifetime, if you will. But I'm going to start by saying I am a New Yorker, born and raised in Brownsville, Brooklyn, and I guess my first touch with what leadership meant to me, or defining myself as a leader, was when I made a deep commitment, and my family made a deep commitment to get involved in a program called Prep for Prep. And Prep for Prep is a leadership program. One might say it also masquerades as a college preparatory program, lifelong peer networking program, and other amazing benefits. But at its core, it is a leadership program. And through that experience, my parents found out about Prep for Prep, and it was a pipeline for me to go from Brownsville, Brooklyn, great public education experience that I had there, and strong enough to prepare me certainly for Prep and for Brearley. But that leadership training that I got through Prep for Prep really helped me be a successful student at Brearley, see myself as a leader, and then really start to take on a sense of leadership as a learning experience. And I'll come back to that idea in a second. So my background at Brearley, amazing opportunities to lead, to learn, to organize, to travel, and see myself as a global citizen, but also be aware of all the areas of development that I would pursue professionally and in my career. And so my next step education-wise was to enter the University of Pennsylvania, where I studied communications. I probably at that moment in time thought I would be a music or media mogul. That was always my area of infinite passion, but got an exposure through my undergraduate program in the business world, in finance in particular. And so fast forward, again, as I was interning at Goldman Sachs, my junior summer, I was involved in another leadership program called Sponsors for Educational Opportunity. And again, another experience of being in a formal opportunity, an internship at a major corporation, but having the support through peer networking and great relationships to buoy you to feel successful in those spaces, but also the hard skills to navigate, early career opportunity and entry. And so I credit Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, or SEO as it's known, is really giving the toolkit to think about oneself over a longer period of time, at minimum 5 years, maximum 30 years, but always having a plan for not only your leadership in terms of personal development, but career and what it takes to advance. And then fast forward, worked at Goldman Sachs, completed my analyst program, really loved the experience of using a new skill set like finance, but really wanted to transition more into philanthropy, which is another, I believe, sort of complexion of finance. And so started to work as a strategic partnerships leader at a nonprofit called Listen Up and Learning Matters. And then in that experience, made a film. That film did quite well. And really in the space of the work that I did, which was essentially intermediary funding, we're funding educational organizations, we're funding youth media programs, we're funding any entity that was helping to develop independent voices through media and education. Really saw an opportunity to dive deeper into education. And so after that experience, working at Learning Matters, working in intermediary funding, making an award-winning documentary, I decided to become a teacher, which was really, again, in this career shift, was really buoyed by a fantastic organization called Teach for America. Again, another leadership organization, as I always say, masquerading as an education pipeline. It does all of those things, but I think at its core, one of the things that Teach for America does best is to prepare oneself for leadership. And so it's all of the skills that it takes to be successful in the classroom, but to see education again as a platform for leadership wherever you are. And so in my time at Teach for America, I would go all the way back to Brownsville, Brooklyn. I entered as a career changer 2010, and I taught at Achievement First in Brownsville for 2 years while earning a master's in education, and then went to Harlem, went uptown, and helped to open a kindergarten program at Harlem Village Academy. And that was a tremendous experience. So literally, again, coming full circle, education is in many ways about taking on leadership. It's about connecting, I believe, the sense of applying your skill, your passion, and in many ways, your vision of yourself and your impact in your community and your world. But again, comes back to some of those vital skills that I learned all the way back, going from Brownsville to Brearley, which are excellence, integrity, commitment, courage, those are the values that organizations like Prep for Prep, like SEO, like Teach for America, will instill in leaders. So career, one of the main points I wanted to bring around in my own story and background is the difference between leadership and career. And for me, I think that the career piece has always been about practice and about leveraging what I learned in some of those amazing informative experiences, like being a part of Prep for Prep, being part of Teach for America, and being a leader in my community. But how do we build that practice in our work? So why did I pursue the Leadership Fellows opportunity? So at Tribeca Film Institute, I'm hired to run their residency program, which is an extraordinary experience. We were taking independent filmmakers and preparing and supporting them to teach filmmaking education in both schools and in prisons. And in that work, as you can imagine, it takes a lot of resource, it takes a lot of commitment, it takes a lot of courage to really to affect change and to measure it. And so I applied to the Leadership Fellows program because while I'd done lots of leadership experiences in the past that most often either focused on personal development, almost exclusively, or were very skills based, I love the idea of a blend of both. And so I reached out to our executive director at the time and asked to be considered. She thought it was a fantastic idea. I applied, and I remember the focus of the application was really around the Change Project. It was the idea that I would not only increase, my relationship currency in the organization, right? I'm now advocating for an important project to be considered, lifting it up, entering this Leadership Fellows program and bringing some resource or capacity to the organization. But I'm also going to gain the net benefit of a peer network of leaders like myself all around the city of New York. So that was very appealing to me. And at the other turn, I do believe, performance currency is extremely important for leaders advancing in her career, because you have to have the skills and the data and the results to say, this is worth doing, and I'm worth assigning myself and being assigned to take on more leadership. And so in that regard, I loved the experience because it held those two opportunities. Fast forward, after 3 years of running the residency at Tribeca Film Institute, one of the things that I would say, which was a lever from the Leadership Fellows program, again, was the opportunity to talk about the evaluation plan that I was able to enact through the fellowship program. And that led to an amazing opportunity at the Ghetto Film School, which also happens to be a grantee of New York Community Trust. So I was able to, within the Tribeca Film Institute, working within the education division there, leverage that experience plus all the training and support from the fellowship to be competitive to move to a new role, a chief strategy and partnership officer role that was created really based on my strengths. And then just sort of underlying all of the career process and transition along the way, and I think growth is really the word I would use. The career growth has always been undergirded by the practice of being involved on boards throughout my career. And so over the last 10 years, I've been on a long list of boards, long for me, thinking about the time spent, but there's always, again, I think this consideration of what's the value of the relationship currency that you gain by being a leader in your career. And certainly board leadership allows you to build authentic networks with leaders in your area of practice. And so there have been many organizations that I've had the honor of serving on, but most, I think most critical and central to my career growth has been ITVS, the Independent Television Service. And just as a sort of to reinforce the idea of coming back in your career, when I produced the documentary Off and Running, which premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival and was funded by the Tribeca Film Institute, preceding my tenure there, ITVS was one of our primary funders. In fact, invested about 90% of the resources for the film. And so we were lucky enough to have, a very creative growth spurt with the film. We premiered at Tribeca, we aired on POV, PBS, and then we were nominated for an Emmy. But all along that ride, as a producer of that project, my strengths and my skills were recognized by ITBS. And so throughout that, sort of awesome run with the film, I was invited to join the board of ITBS. And so, again, I think the idea of not only reinvesting in yourself as a leader, reinvesting in the organizations who've invested in you, and really reinvesting in the power of relationship currency has been, I think, a cultural practice of the leadership experience that I've had. And finally, my why. The impact that the Leadership Fellows Program has had on my leadership and my career have been really tremendous. So first, I want to lift up the peer network. As Pat said, a lot of what we are learning through the evaluation process is that there are these amazing stories of how a network driven relationship can bear fruit in transitioning and gaining ground in your career, but also in just learning authentically about new ways, new solutions, new ways to collaborate across sectors and across the field. And that relationship currency that we have gained through the peer network of the Leadership Fellows Program is tremendous. And so you need both. You need to be equipped to get the work done and do the work, but if you don't have the right relationships, you can often find yourself in a corner. I think second, the organizational change project, it's really, at the center of the fellowship experience. Not only is it a way to measure impact over a very discrete period of time, I was able to complete, in my case, I focused on building both strategy and implementation for assessment, program assessment within the Tribeca Film Institute, but piloting it within the education division. And I was able to speak with, our executive leadership, with stakeholders, with partners, with my team, and talk about the success and the results of a project that actually was critical to the success of our program, the existence really of our program. So that measurable impact of the change project is really important, I think, as well in talking to others in the field. And certainly was very important in my transition to a greater leadership platform at Ghetto Film School. A big part of my work in leading strategy is really about articulating the value of evaluation and measuring it, and really leading with the question, which I think is essential to the leadership program, is what are our values as nonprofit leaders, and how do we hold those values and measure what's important to not only the organization, but to all of the stakeholders, including, and most importantly, the constituents that we serve. And then finally, mentorship. I can't speak highly enough about mentors in my life who've shaped my ability to confidently move into leadership, to move through my career. There's a mentorship component of the Leadership Fellows Program where you can either be matched with a mentor or you can select your own mentor. In my case, I chose a mentor who's someone who's been very supportive in my career over many years, who I just hadn't had an opportunity to formalize certain aspects of the work with. And he is Brian Newman, who had a very deep relationship at Tribeca Film Institute, but also broadly in the field of both measuring and moving new partnerships and new media and storytelling. And so I was able to identify the perfect mentor for where I was in that role at that time. And that sectoral sponsorship, if you will, has been fantastic because now, we meet more often, we're able to share more authentically, and I'm able to really say thank you in a way, because the mentorship allows you to shine a light on someone perhaps who you've been working with maybe informally, but to formalize that mentorship, I think can bear really wonderful fruit as well. So this is a bit about my experience, the impact that the fellowship has had on my career path. And I hope that's helpful in thinking about one thing that I'm going to leave, my story cycle with is the work of being a nonprofit leader has so much to do with your values, the values of the organizations that you choose to lead and support. But the intentionality of the work is so important. And so often I try to think about what is the sort of distance between the intention of the work and the organization and the leadership, and then the impact that it's having. And I think that the Leadership Fellows Program helped to match those values in my own career, thinking about not only having the intention to move my work and my impact forward, but also the ability to measure it and realize a new career opportunity. So that is why.
Thank you, Sharese. And I'm looking at the time now, and we have about 13 minutes. So I think we're just going to get into the Q&A now, if that's okay with the both of you. We've gotten several great questions, and I don't think we're going to get to all of them, so we're going to try to get through as many as possible before we close. And then what I would like to propose is that I actually send you these questions, Pat and Sharese, and perhaps you can respond in writing, and I can send it as a follow-up to folks after the webinar.
Okay.
So thank you. So let me get to one of the questions here about the program itself. And this question comes from Leandra Burchall, and she asked, I think this question is for Pat. Describe the process used to decide whether you would invest in building leaders or organizations.
I don't see that as a either or. I see it as a both and, building leaders and building organizations. And the first part of that question was, what's the process used to determine how to invest?
Yep, so describe the process used to decide whether you would invest in building leaders or organizations.
Well, okay, well, ignoring the either or part for the moment, I will say that one of the ways that we generally get about twice as many applicants as we can bring into the program. And so one thing that we've learned over time is that leadership potential or leadership background and experience comes in many different forms. And so it's not always in the traditional sort of hierarchical, I manage a team of, 3 other or 4 other staff people, but sometimes it's, I was given the assignment to coordinate a community coalition. I was just a coordinator. Nobody was really accountable to me, but I was responsible for getting everybody rowing in the same direction on this particular campaign that we had to change something in the community. When people describe something like that in their application to the fellowship, we've learned now that that is a real beacon, that says this is somebody that doesn't shrink away from stepping up and taking on leadership roles. And so, I guess you could say that's the process that we've used to look for sort of non-traditional and non-hierarchical ways that people show, that they're in that frame of mind where they see themselves as leaders.
Great, thank you. So I have a question now for Sharese. So Sharese, this question comes from Colleen Cruikshank, and she's with the Schusterman Family Foundation. She asked, how does the Ghetto Film School support the talent development of its staff? So we've heard, such a really helpful story from you, but we want to see how this actually plays out within your current organization.
Absolutely, a great question. And a big part of the reason I joined the leadership team at Ghetto Film School was specifically because of its investment in people. So one specific way, we actually are subscribed to a results-only work environment, and it's been a popular way of building out plans for work and collaborative ways to work together, but really allows the individual to lead a plan over 6-month intervals of time and share that with the entire organization. So twice a year, we gather and share those work plans and again, within that work plan, you develop your own individual path for professional development. We are actually, and part of my work at the organization right now is I'm gathering for an offsite retreat where we're actually going to look at the culture and practice of the organization and then revisit the specific supports that are available for each of the staff members to build around that work plan, how they might develop themselves. So over the years, we've had partnerships with Landmark. We've also had fellowship opportunities at Ghetto Film School where staff are encouraged to participate. But it very much is an individualized and customized approach to creating support for each of the talent that's on staff. And I think the piece that's really critical, we are a creative organization. We do many things by supporting and developing young people, but this results-only work environment is very unique in that, it really allows for autonomy. It allows for deciding where you need support and resource and development. And then at an organizational level, there is a commitment to help meet each leader in that goal. So it's actually a big part of the core culture of the Ghetto Film School, and we'll be actually gathering for our final retreat and offsite in a few weeks. So that's the sort of broad stroke, and it's integral to the culture.
Very timely discussion then.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so my next question is from Amarilis Pullen, and she's with the Parent Family Foundation. So well, let me put the question out, and you guys can decide who to respond, or you can both respond. So outside of the sessions, is there one-on-one coaching offered to fellows while participating in the cohort or after they complete the fellowship?
We've had this conversation internally here at the Trust of what is mentoring versus what is coaching. And I know that there are some who feel it's a really distinctly different activity. I'm not so sure I agree with that wholeheartedly. So that's a preface to my saying that one of the interesting findings in the evaluation is that the mentor component is considered one of the most valuable parts of this program by every, whether it's faculty, fellows, mentors themselves have been part of a focus group, etc. But it's also one of the most mercurial aspects of it, in that the match has to work, the chemistry has to work. I would say that to the extent that we have excellent matches, we do coaching. Because to me, a good mentor is someone that is more than just somebody you meet with, over lunch 4 times a year, but someone who's actually got assignments. I want you to work on this aspect of your relationship with that coworker, or something along those lines. And to me, that's coaching. So a short answer to the question is yes. I think sometimes we have mentors that actually do delve into a coaching relationship.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like there's a lot that happens within within the structure of in classroom learning, and then what happens outside of it to really reinforce what the fellows are gaining and what they're learning. Mm-hmm. So a follow-up question, this is from Lakimja Maddox. Are there any opportunities to connect fellows with board or junior board opportunities? And I think that's a good question, especially, Sharese, given what you shared about your own board leadership and participation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is really a fantastic pathway, right, to translate all of the great benefits and gains from the program. Again, there is a connection between leadership and career, but I think there are certain activities and muscles that you develop as you pursue a pathway in either stance. And I think specifically board leadership or junior board leadership as a pathway to executive or broader board leadership opportunities is a fantastic match for the experience of the Leadership Fellows program, where you are personally reflecting and developing and building that muscle and confidence to express on a larger platform, but also getting the hard skills. that are required to lead at a board level. The operational and financial skill set, the communication skills, the consensus building, most often, being leveraged in a board setting. So yes, I think that what happens naturally is that you as a fellow will connect with 25 new organizations across sectors. And in my experience also as a board leader, I've worked, deeply in my field and area, but I've also been able to lend my services to organizations that are not directly in my area of focus because I have a financial skill set. I can be active, on an audit committee or a finance committee or a development committee. And so you are building those relationships across sector that you would never have a chance to build otherwise. So I think that becomes a very natural next step and maybe unexpected sort of outcome potentially of leadership fellows along the way.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sharese. So we are getting close to the end of our time together. So I wanted to just say a few more quick things. First of all, I want to thank Sharese and Pat for sharing their knowledge, their experience, and their story with us this afternoon. And I was really happy to see the level of interest that people had to join us today on a Friday afternoon when people are usually trying to run out and start their weekend. So, so glad.
Thank you, Yolanda.
Thank you.
The level of preparation was really outstanding. So thanks for making it easy for us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for allowing me to prepare so much. Okay, so just a few quick things before we end. For people that want to learn more about the New York Community Trust Leadership Fellowship Program, the link is here for you to visit and learn more. And I also included a link to the Ghetto Film School, so you can learn more about the work that Sharese does and more about her organization. If folks are interested in staying in touch with us at Fund the People, these are all the social media channels that we're on. So we're happy to have you follow us and learn more about the work that's happening to increase investment in talent in the nonprofit workforce. I also want to make sure that people know that we'll be reaching out with a brief survey of this webinar so that you can tell us what you thought about it. Let us know if there are things we can improve for future webinars, and also if there are topics that we haven't yet covered that you would like us to cover. We'd really love to hear from you about that. I will send a link to the webinar survey in a follow-up email next week, and I will also include the slide deck that we saw today. The other thing I want to make sure people take away is the Fund the People Toolkit. So I know I've been talking about it this afternoon. I want to make sure that everybody knows the resource is available, and it's free, and it's for funders and for nonprofits. We have one more webinar coming up, and that'll close us out for the year. It will feature the Community Memorial Foundation, and they're an Illinois-based funder, and they have their they will be sharing their story about how they support nonprofit talent in their region. And they're a health-focused foundation, so they support organizations that are working in the healthcare field. A very important topic right now that we're facing. And if you have any questions about the session today, about any of our resources, or any follow-up questions, I think there was just one question that we didn't get to, so I'll make sure to share that with Pat and Sharese so that they can respond. You have my email here. You can contact me with any questions. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today and wish you a very happy Thanksgiving. And I hope to see everybody next month.